Matt, welcome back to the podcast for the third time.
Erica, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
For those of you who missed our past episodes, Matt and I have done discussions on hamstring strength and also speed and acceleration. And I think we maybe did another one on agility. So this might be the fourth time. I don't know.
I
I'm
think you're
losing
correct.
track. I'll
It's been fun
include
each time, so that's great.
yeah. So many great topics. I'll include the links below so y'all can catch up if you missed those. Today, Matt and I are going to talk about sport specific training. And right now, this is the Strong Female Athlete podcast. Obviously, we have a lot of soccer listeners tuning in, but there's also girls who play lacrosse, who run track, who do cheerleading as well. And they're curious if they need to train differently. Do the soccer players need to train differently? And we're purely talking about performance training. So maybe let's get into, is there such thing as sport specific in the performance training world?
I'll answer the question first in a short answer. I would say yes, but there's a catch here. So I'm sure you've heard this, and many people hear this, like from the general lay public side. Well, I'm going to do some resistance training. Well, I'm going to do some functional training. Well, I'm going to do some strength and conditioning, performance training, sports specific training. There's all these different words and topics. And I think what has happened is we've basically taken, you think of like GPP, right? General physical preparedness. And you think about SPP, like specific physical preparedness. And that those models of training derived from some really smart people years ago. I think like Yuri Verkhoshansky and really smart researchers from a long time ago. What those things were saying, so GPP and SPP, is general physical preparedness is just moving your body in the planes of motion that we can, like squatting, hip hinging, upper body pushing, pulling in front, or horizontal, upper body pushing, pulling above, like vertical, different types of stability core training, moving the spine, locomotion, like running, sprinting, so on and so forth. Specificity or specific type of physical preparedness or sport specific training, think of that as, okay, I play soccer, right? And you want to be able to plant your left foot. I'm a righty here. And I'm going to swing my right leg all the way from back to front to forcefully kick that soccer ball. Hopefully it goes into the net, upper 90, we've got a goal. When we think about that, sure, are there exercises you could do in the gym that directly mimic that motion and you add resistance? You certainly could. However, you have to ask yourself, what's going to give you the most return on investment? Because let's face it, you're playing soccer, you're probably parts of different club teams, you have weekend games, you have night practices, you want to try to get in some training. You don't have all this time. Maybe you have 2 times a week where you train between 30 and 60 minutes each time. Well, what's going to give you the best bang for your buck and return on investment? Maybe stuff like split squats, single leg squats, hamstring curls, sort of deadlift exercise variations, single leg deadlift, stuff like that. That might get you strong and powerful enough to be great at kicking a soccer ball. Whereas kicking a soccer ball with added weight or resistance in the weight room, we're being redundant with what we already do in the sport of soccer practicing games. We're just adding weight to it now. Mike Boyle talks a lot about filling buckets that are not already full. So, for example, if I'm playing soccer, I know I'm filling the bucket of kicking the soccer ball plenty of times. I have a high volume of kicking a soccer ball. I have a high volume of running and sprinting. I have a high volume of changing directions. What am I not doing while I'm playing soccer? I'm not performing squatting exercises. I'm not performing split squatting. I'm not performing a high enough volume of jumping, and I'm not performing a high enough volume of, for example, hamstring exercises for hamstring strengthening and for knee health, so on and so forth. So when you're training someone or working in the weight room or strength conditioning, the goal is to fill the buckets of what they don't already have or not adequate enough yet from.
I love that answer. And I think that example of adding the resistance to kicking a soccer ball is a very common one that people ask about. They're like, oh, well, to
Mhm.
build kicking power, I just put a resistance band on my ankle and then shoot the ball. But I also wonder with an exercise like that, they're not able to get really a full range of motion, which can hinder the athlete from building that kicking power.
It's such a great point. And you've seen examples like this as well, Erica. And baseball is another good example. They have what's called like weighted throwing or weighted pitching. Now, I want to differentiate here. using a large medicine ball, which is like, the size, I don't know, like 12 to 18 inches, where I hug it, I hold it, and maybe I toss it into a wall. That's different. That stuff is adequate. We would do that in training. However, if I take a baseball or something that looks like a baseball and I make it, 4 pounds, 6 pounds, 8 pounds, 10 pounds, 12 pounds, and I'm practicing the motion of throwing a baseball with weight, there are some folks in the baseball performance training world that believe in that. There's some that don't, because, well, we're already pitching and throwing the ball a lot during the game and the practice of baseball. Why add load to it in the weight room? Why not just get the upper body strong at speeds and velocities that you can control to build strength, and then harness that strength and then do power-based exercises that involve the upper body, that go through, like you said, fuller ranges of motion, that has a direct transfer, or what we call transferability, to the qualities needed to go to lay back and throw the baseball, so to speak. It's the same for the kicking motion of the lower body. So it's a matter of, if we're in the weight room or the training center, what is the greatest return on investment for my time?
My husband would love that you mentioned the weighted ball thing because he's not a big fan of that either.
I'm pretty confident, like Eric Cressy, who's a baseball performance expert with the Yankees now. I'm pretty confident that they've gotten away from that. A lot of the baseball performance coaches have gotten away from that because of the load management and the volume management stuff. So it makes sense, Same thing for soccer.
Yeah, and there's only so much you can do as far as progressive overload with some of these sport
Hmm.
specific resisted exercises. So just coming back to
Hmm.
kicking the soccer ball, if an athlete keeps doing that over and over again with the same resistance band, I mean, you can't really get that much stronger anyway, and the body's just going to adapt to that exercise. So they're just better off doing split squats or weighted hip bridges or deadlifts, like you said, to continue to build those muscles that are behind kicking power.
Yeah, it's almost like your body's an engine, your body's a car. Take the car, for example. My gas is empty. All right, fill up the gas tank. Well, my oil change need to be changed. Well, no, fill up the gas tank. Well, the tire's flat. Should I get a new tire? No, no, no. Just fill up the gas tank. You'll have a great full gas tank, but you need an oil change. You need to change the windshield wipers, and your tire's flat. Meaning, work on the other constituent parts that help you build the car to operate at a fast and powerful and strong format. And so I think a lot of people get caught up in sport specificity. Like, take kicking a soccer ball again, and let's just say I take an ankle strap and I connect it to a low anchor point on a cable column, like a pulley, like a plate loaded pulley machine, and I'm practicing going through my kicking with that resistance. Like you had said, Eric, how heavy can you really get to kick? Like, how heavy is a soccer ball? I don't know. It's not heavy.
No,
And
not
how
it's like a
how much
feather.
force? Yeah, it's like a feather, right?
Yeah.
How much force goes into actually kicking a soccer ball? Okay, there's a good amount of newtons of force, but I promise you that pales in comparison with the newtons of force, or the amount of force generated if you're doing a heavy split squat. Let's say you're a young teenage female soccer player and you're doing a dumbbell split squat, which I'm sure Erica's posted a lot about. You have maybe a pair of 40s or 50-pound dumbbells in your hands doing split squats for 8 reps aside, 3 sets. That's a lot more force that you're generating. That again will have that transferability to be really good at kicking a soccer ball single leg.
Hmm. I get asked a lot about wearing weighted vests too to improve sprinting.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
another one popular in the soccer community, especially, is training in the sand, or quote unquote
Hmm.
speed training in the sand, like these sand beach workouts. So I guess maybe we can talk about why those aren't the best, just kind of coming into this whole idea of full range of motion and recruiting the motor units we want to recruit for exercises like
Hmm.
sprinting.
Perfect. I'll do the sand one first because it's the best one.
Yes.
Working out in the sand, it's awesome. You get a tan. It's a fun time. You can jump in the water after. Like it's great for culture building, camaraderie, like beach volleyball with the medicine ball, like that. Those are fun. I think of that is more like you when you're gamifying training. Like that can be fun. Like for soccer, there's like soccer volleyball where soccer, you tap it over the net. Like that's fun. Think about this though. When you're running in sand, whether even if it's packed, hard, compact sand or soft, fluffy sand, you're not getting a full range of motion in your ankle, knee, and hip to be able to sprint, run, cut, so on and so forth. So that right there ends the conversation in terms of, is this something that's going to provide a ton of physiological value for me? Not so much, but it can be a great thing to gamify. Why not just sprint? on a compliant surface like a track or turf or so on and so forth. That's the sand one. I mean, this is similar to the concept of when we talk about like why using ladders. Are you getting fat? Are you building speed with ladders? Not necessarily. You're building maybe some coordination, some motor control, some change of direction ability, but you're not necessarily becoming faster because you're using ladders. I just wanted to add that in because it's kind of this. Some people do ladders on sand. I'm like, all right, we got a double whammy here. With the other part of the conversation, can you pull me back and remind me what it was? I apologize.
Yeah, running with weighted vests.
Great question. So there was a lot of research on, I'll call it resisted sprinting. There was a lot of research on doing resisted sprinting. So like with the weight vest or more so like a sled or band resisted. With the sled, the research was on loading the sled for 10%, roughly 10 to 20% of your body weight. That research is still being utilized in like collegiate soccer, collegiate sports. But now in the sport of American football, I say American football because I'm finished my dissertation. I can't say football because over the pond it's soccer. Like I know you guys know. There is some research being put out where you can use up to 30, even 40% of your body weight loaded on a sled. So if I weigh 200 pounds, 40% is 80 pounds on the sled total to do resisted sprints that you can have a direct carryover into helping you build out or increase your speed. So that's different than weight vest though, because with a sled, right, I have to be leaning, I have to angle forward. It's mimicking sprinting angles, like joint angles, which is very specific. That's joint specific training for the angles of sprinting. That's a real conversation. But if I'm using a weight vest and I'm just sprinting or running, I like weight vest walks, right? I like that for like low intensity steady state cardio or like getting outside, getting some decompression, vitamin D. But for the sport of soccer, I think you're better suited to do either band resisted and or sled resisted sprints because that's going to directly transfer to the sprinting you'll do in the sport. It's not to say that weight vest sprinting or running is a bad idea. I don't know that weight vest running is going to have a great return on investment other than you probably sweat a little bit, which would be nice. But weight vest sprinting, you have to think of the angles you're at. Like Derek Hansen is a great person to have a conversation with, running and sprinting expert, but also like hamstring, return to play, rehab protocols for sprinters and soccer players. And he has a lot of good charts and images on this and why joint angles are important for sprinting more so than with a sled versus a weight vest.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I do think sleds, especially at 10% of body weight, as a great starting point to work on that
Mm-hmm.
acceleration. And one thing I do want to confirm with you. So the sleds should definitely come much later for like our older girls in high school, college. But for our munchkins, our under 13s, they should just sprint fast, have fun so that they're working on building those motor skills and fast twitch muscles. They shouldn't be doing sleds as
100%.
10-year-olds.
100% agreed. 100% agreed. I think when you think about so yes, 1,000% agree with you. And also to add on to that, when you think about if you're operating at max intensity, in my opinion, the hardest exercise, so the most taxing exercise you could ever do in the world, there's no equipment needed. It's max intent sprinting, short distances, large recovery time. So if you're doing that as a young kid and also you're having fun, that's plenty of resistance. Plenty of resistance.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I had to confirm that because there are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
parents listening for our ages
Mm-hmm.
like 8 to 12, 8 to 13, and I don't want them to be like, "Oh, let's all go out there and get sleds." It's like, "No, you're going to graduate to that point once you're fully matured later in adolescence." So, yeah, save sleds for later. They're super awesome. Now I did want to talk about training surface. So, for a lot of our field-based athletes like soccer, lacrosse, field hockey, they will say, okay, well, we should do all of our speed training on turf or on grass. But why is it beneficial to move away from, I guess, the sport specific surface to maybe a track?
Yeah, so you think of the environmental contextual factors like cleats. Do I have indoor turfs shoes or do I have regular cleats with more the longer studs? Is it a grass setting where it's, maybe it just rained a few days before and it's sort of like really soft and really compliant and maybe some muddy? Or is it a nice turf? But is that turf a little bit higher in grade, like the fake grass is higher, so it's a little bit more spongy, or is it a really low cut? Like the inexpensive type of turf where it's really really low cut. It's like a rug or a carpet rather, a really thin carpet turf where underneath is usually some sort of hard object like cement, where it's less compliant, it's more stiff, or going to a track which has I would say a moderate level of compliance. It's stiff enough, but it's compliant enough where you can have a little bit of bounce. I think a track is an excellent place to practice these drills as well, because you want to be able to understand bounce and that elastic component of sprinting. So, for example, if we sprint on concrete, there's no compliance. The concrete doesn't move at all, and it wins the battle every time when you sprint. So you're going to be driving forces into the ground by moving forward, but there's no joint reaction. Like the joint reaction forces are lower because there's no give back. It's a non-compliant surface. Whereas if I'm using a track, like you had mentioned, which is a great idea, there's a little bit of compliance, a little bit of give, so it gives you some of that bounce, and you can feel like you're more bouncing a track. And for me personally, sprinting on a track has always been more comfortable because I feel like I can bounce and I can propel and be more elastic, and I feel faster. I think a combination of turf and track, if you have it, is great. I wouldn't say that one is the best to do. I think a combination of both is probably a good idea.
Yeah, I had to ask that because we'll get out to the track in our summer off season just as a new input to the body. But
Hmm.
sometimes my field based athletes will be like, "Why are we doing speed on a track when in a game we're on grass?" And I
Hmm.
try to explain to them it's about the stimulus that you give the
Hmm.
body and the central nervous system, and you get a great one from the track, which is going to raise the ceiling on your speed on the grass. I don't know if you can
Love it.
explain it better than me, but that's what I
No, that's
said to
great. No,
them.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Like when you think about a novel providing like you said, a novel stimulus, it's new. So although the general public might say, well, sprinting on turf versus sprinting on track, not that much different. It is a lot different. There's a little bit of a learning curve. And it's a novel stimulus which forces you to have to adapt. Neuromuscular, the body adapts. The research says between 2 and 12 weeks. There's a wide spanning, it's a gap there. So I would say within a month, the body has a pretty good job at adapting. So it's just a different stimulus to give the body so that you understand, okay, I know how to sprint really well on compliant surfaces and maybe some surfaces that are not so compliant. So you're more adaptable when you're playing the sport of soccer.
Yeah. Yeah, you explained it way better than I did.
No, it was a
I'll just
combo effort. It was a team effort, team effort.
yeah, definitely. I'll send my athletes to this video so they can hear it from you. So yeah, you would say as far as sport specific, so with the strength and speed buckets, pretty much across all female athlete sports, we're just training like strength is strength, speed is speed. It shouldn't be too different across sports. Maybe like the speed component changing some reactive stuff or agility, but other than that, would you say it's pretty similar for everyone?
Pretty similar, especially earlier on in the process. Like if you're
Yeah.
training, what did you call them? The 10 to 13-year old, something that I'm sorry,
The
you said they're
munchkins.
the munchkins. Okay, the munchkins. I look at like, is it like 10 to 12, 10 to 13 type thing?
Yeah, like
Okay,
pre-growth spurt. Yeah.
perfect. The munchkins, I love that. It's a great name to call them. The munchkins, like, just think their body weight is resistance. It's something they haven't learned to control yet for body control and athleticism. So simple exercises and movements like squatting, hip hinging, single leg squatting, single leg hip hinging, like the basic human movement patterns are plenty. Sprinting, plenty. When you get to the middle school slash high school, maybe it's time to continue to fill those same buckets, but get stronger and add some sort of external load like dumbbells, kettlebells, resistance bands, TRX, trap bars, barbells, so on and so forth. And I think you get what you get from the sport is the reactivity, like you mentioned, the change of direction ability, some other levels of sprinting. Like the fastest you'll ever sprint undoubtedly will be in a game, will be in a game like situation. Training that in like on your training days is really hard to replicate unless there's competition, which is a great thing to have. And also you want to time that. But I would say, yes, I would agree with you that for the most part, all sports, you're training the same human qualities. You might differentiate a little bit with a rotational sport where you want to train lightly loaded, power based rotational exercise like med ball throws. But for the most part, you're doing a lot of the same stuff. and it should look pretty similar from sport to sport, especially earlier on in the process.
Yeah, yeah, especially for our adolescent female
Mhm.
athletes. And it's so funny because I've had a few like dancers and cheerleaders be like, "Oh, should we do pull-ups too?" And I'm like, "Why not?" I mean, you have to be strong, you have to build a robust body composition regardless because your sport is very demanding in different ways,
Oh yeah,
and the back handsprings you're doing and holding up other people, like it's very demanding on the upper body. So I think, pull ups, split squats, deadlifts, the basic lifts should
hmm,
be practiced amongst all female athletes.
totally agree. Totally agree with that. And I think sometimes we like in the field, sometimes certain exercises are like demonized, like, oh, don't do that because of this, or don't do that because you're not this type of athlete. Like a pull up, for example, is a natural human movement that we should all become strong in, regardless of sport. Then when you factor in, you said cheerleading, right? Like they're holding people above their heads. We would want to be strong there. Like that's a great. So then this goes back to when you think about the needs analysis. A very simple way to look at a needs analysis. What are the movements they're commonly doing in the sport? So those are the biomechanical demands. Like, oh, I'm throwing a ball, I'm rotating and throwing a ball through my hip, through my core, through my shoulder, or I'm kicking a soccer ball, right? Then you look at the bioenergetic demands, like think of the energy systems that you'll have to use throughout that sport. So if I'm sprinting really fast versus walking slow, different energy systems are prioritized for those different scenarios. And then what are the common injuries associated with the sport? Well, if I sprint a lot in soccer, the hamstring muscles are susceptible to straining the hamstring muscle, so to speak. So when you conduct your needs analysis before you train, that will help answer a lot of questions on why are we doing these exercises. Well, this connects back to the needs analysis, the injury history, the training goals, so on and so forth. And I think when we can explain it that way, that's a very logical, rational, strategic way to explain it. And I think it helps everyone understand, okay, now I know why I'm doing it. And that answers your question like, why not? This is why we're doing it, right? So I
Yeah.
think that can be helpful for people.
I think that's so great, just looking at the buckets that need to be filled and
Mhm.
looking at what these athletes are constantly doing too much of. And as you were talking there, I wrote down softball, and for them, some of the lifts they might not want to do is more like
Mhm.
overhead presses and a ton of bench
Mhm.
press, because like a
Mhm.
softball pitcher, if they're pitching 100 pitches in a weekend, you don't want to overload that muscular pattern. And then for soccer, this comes back to kind of your hate on ladder drills. Soccer players are constantly in that same position the whole game. They're slouched over, they're using their quads so much. So it's like, why would I overflow that bucket and add more ladders when we can sprint and activate the hamstrings more and build those fat twitch muscles better and get them to kind of open up their posture for that top speed. Everyone like makes fun of me for hating on ladders, but I just don't see the bang for buck, especially with field
Yeah.
based athletes, because they're already doing a lot of those same movements already. And it just
Mhm.
turns into
Mhm.
overuse at that point.
Yeah, and I think like just to be clear, 'cause we're on the same page here. Like ladders definitely like a Bosu ball. These things have a time and a place, but it's a very specific time and place. If I'm going to use ladders, it's got to be like maybe someone who's dealing, and I'm working with a rehab provider with a neurological setback or something they're working through, or maybe an older population folk who maybe they're trying to build their body control and their coordination. Okay, that is a great implementation there. But for the athletes we're talking about here in this sport at this age group, we probably can do better with sprinting and other drills instead.
Mm-hmm. No, just to wrap this up, you did mention the energy systems, and I think that's a good
Mhm.
point. I do think that's where we can get very sports specific because, like a
Yep.
softball player, for example, they don't need to be going for a 3 mile jog. They're not endurance based athletes. So I think we just have to look at, okay, what are the energy systems being used? Are
Mhm.
they an endurance sport? Are they a power sport, a speed sport? And how can we train that appropriately?
Yeah, no, this is great. So there are four buckets that we can break this up into. So if I'm doing an action, let's say I'm sprinting 40 yards, okay? So something between 0 and 10 seconds, roughly, we're pulling from phosphorus creatine or creatine phosphate. That's think of that as I'm operating at really, really high intensities and I need a lot of time to recover afterward. Then we have the glycolytic tank or energy system. So there's two parts. There's fast glycolysis, which is a lot. more like the creatine phosphate, the 0 to 10 seconds. And then there's slow glycolysis, which is more like there's another thing we'll talk about. It's slower, beta oxidative. So 10 seconds to 30 seconds, if I'm doing something that lasts between 10 and 30 seconds, I'm using predominantly my fast glycolysis in my energy tank. The other ones are still there, but I'm using predominantly that substrate, if you will, that part of my energy system. If I'm doing an exercise or a task that it takes me between 30 seconds and 2 minutes to complete, I'm using more of what's called slow glycolysis, which now we're getting more toward the slower energy systems. And if I'm doing something that's 2 or 3 minutes or greater, like running a marathon, which is a lot greater than 2 or 3 minutes, it's pulling predominantly from the beta oxidative energy system. So when we think about tasks, like let's say there's I think it's the yo-yo test. I know a lot of soccer programs will use that. There's two different types. It's a yo-yo recovery test or something like that. I'm miswording it. But that's really specific to the demands of the sport, like the intermittent demands of the sport of soccer. You're never just running 40 yards, you're sprinting 40 yards, stopping, and then the game's over. You might sprint 20, cut right, sprint 10, stop, turn around, jump, hit a header, sprint another 5. Like it's really intermittent in the lot of stop, go, change of direction. So I think, yes, conditioning is absolutely sport specific for the sport of soccer, because when you test someone or assess them on an exercise test, like a yo-yo recovery test, then you can retest it because you have baseline scores. Okay, Erica completed this yo-yo recovery test I'm making up a number, 1 minute. She completed it next month in 58 seconds, so on and so forth. Then you can measure that. And that gets into the SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, so on and so forth. So yes, I agree with you 100%. Conditioning, we want to get sport specific because that's going to be the demands we're going to need to meet on the field.
I think we need to do a separate episode at another time on conditioning, because
Oh boy.
there's so much to that and how to train each of the energy systems, and just kind of the misconceptions people have with our power and speed based sports, and they're lumping them into these endurance runs, and that could be a fun episode. So maybe we'll do that next
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's a great topic. It's like, like in the sport of baseball, for example, like they still, high school baseball coaches still have their play. Hey, go run 2 miles around for what reason? They're never going to do that in the sport. So yeah, it's a wide open topic and plenty to discuss for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll do that next time. But I think this definitely cleared everything on sport specific and when we need to consider it. But overall, most female athletes should be training to gain strength and speed, and then just looking at the individual athlete and what they need and the energy systems of the sport. So, Matt, thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on, and I'll see everyone next time.